Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I want to talk about a thing that people encounter while reading. In 1817, the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, author of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, introduced a term into the English language, which was suspension of disbelief. Coleridge believed that if you had a human interest in the story with a semblance of truth, the reader would suspend his disbelief in the supernatural or the fantastic and accept those unreal elements as just part of the story. And for the most part, I think that does happen a lot when people read. But I also think that there are levels of suspension of disbelief. Some readers are very tight in their suspension of disbelief. They will just give the author just a tiny little crack of the supernatural that they are willing to believe in. But some readers, they're just willing to give a whole 100-yard line and accept a whole lot of supernatural that they will believe if the story is good enough. So how can we judge the levels of suspension of disbelief? I mentioned in a previous video in a book about vampires, it was Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned, that there was a scene when one of the vampires came across a mountain and didn't want to climb the mountain and just started flying over the mountain. And that broke my suspension of disbelief because I could just not accept that a vampire could fly. So that was a case where that suspension of disbelief broke. A commenter to that video mentioned, well, if you read more comics, characters that fly are really rather ordinary and not really open to negotiation. If it's a comic and a character flies, it's just totally acceptable. Sort of like a private detective carrying a concealed weapon. It's just not an issue for comic book readers that characters can fly. So there's that suspension of disbelief. They got this whole yard or 9 yards, 100 yards, whatever, that they are willing to suspend their disbelief. They know that humans or vampires can never fly. Okay, vampires can never fly because vampires are not real. You are already suspending your disbelief by reading a story about vampires. But at least for me, that ability to fly was that sliver that broke the story, that symbol of the truth. I could not accept it. And I find that very interesting that so many readers have so many different levels of what they are willing to accept or reject in their suspension of disbelief. Now, a nonfiction reader, or primarily nonfiction reader, is not going to have any suspension of disbelief. If the work is nonfiction, they expect that author to be telling the truth every time, whenever feasible. And got to sort of fake it and make judgments. They want that author to call it out saying, well, I'm not sure this happened, but this could have happened. And depending on the nonfiction, I'm saying that when I say nonfiction, that they're actually talking about the real world. I guess there are some nonfiction authors who talk about ancient astronauts who readers may have to suspend their disbelief quite heavily for to believe in those ancient astronauts. Maybe I was a little too lax when I said that nonfiction readers didn't have a level of suspension of disbelief. Depending on the nonfiction, maybe they do. Well, anyway, when I read, I have a much narrower level where I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. There are a lot of things an author can do which will break that and take me out of reality and saying, this story is freaky deaky. It's nutsy Fagin, because what's being described is just not possible, such as flying. That's one of my pet peeves in reading, is that humans cannot fly. But as I said, comic book readers, sure, anybody can fly. You don't have to explain their ability to fly. So I find that interesting, how much people are willing to suspend their disbelief. And it's just a topic that fascinates me. My question is, what is something that can make you crack or break that suspension of disbelief? What sort of event will shatter it? If you are a realistic fiction, it's probably not that high. You may accept a little magic reality. That's okay. But again, once you go into the heavy-duty supernatural, maybe you don't have that much willing suspension of disbelief. Maybe it's very easy to break it. And again, people who read fantasy or comics are going to have a very high level where they're willing to accept a whole lot more of the supernatural and the implausible before that suspension of disbelief has been broken. I think that's about all I have to say, other than you can also apply that to non-supernatural events. Maybe you are reading a detective story and the detective fires the pistol more times than that pistol would have bullets in the magazine, and nowhere in that description does it say that the detective reloaded his gun. Maybe that would crack your disbelief, saying, no, he has to reload after X number of shots. And I presume that the person would be knowledgeable in pistols or maybe revolvers and knowing how many bullets a gun can hold. That's another area. Stretching it out of the supernatural, but I think would also apply there. Well, anyway, thank you for watching and keep on reading.